Thank you all. All right, so, introduce our speaker for tonight. Tommy Lomeli is a ceramic artist born in Stockton, California. His mixed media sculptural work reimagines culture identity through Mexican-American car customization. Through the lens of lowrider aesthetics, he constructs pieces that call back to the vehicle as an extension of creative individuality within regional movements. His pieces celebrate customs of storytelling through vibrant embellishments found in historic Mesoamerican artworks that are echoed in modern Chicano lowriders. Lomeli holds a BA from CSU Sacramento and an MFA from the University of Kansas. He is a recipient of numerous awards, including the International Sculpture Center's 2024 Outstanding Student Achievement in Contemporary Sculpture Award and first place at NCCA's 2023 National Juried Student Exhibition. Tommy is currently a resident at the Charlotte Street Foundation in Kansas City and an adjunct professor at Park University. Please help me welcome Tommy Lomeli.
Hello. Thank you, Haley, for that introduction. And I just want to say thank you, everyone, for coming tonight and giving me the opportunity to share my work with you. I usually do my own kind of bio in the beginning, so I'm just going to start with my background and where I was born and raised. So this is a photo of me back home. I grew up in the Central Valley in Stockton, California, right below Sacramento. And my family manufactures concrete statuary. So they immigrated here from Mexico 3 generations ago, so I'm now like the 4th generation statue maker, or was at one point. I grew up making statues out of cast concrete, and I did that all throughout my childhood and all the way up until I moved here to Kansas for my grad program. And it was kind of this experience of working with my hands with medium that was outside of clay that kind of shaped my early view of what art could be. Art was really communal in the sense of how my family viewed it. And in art school, I was kind of this individual artist trying to find my own path. So I was trying to blend those two worlds together and figure out how can I speak to my community or a broader community of artists and share my work through that way. So I had experience, building larger sculptures and vessels and pottery in a different way than clay. But as I kind of worked with clay throughout my education, I always built kind of larger vessels. And I was always really attracted to the volume that vessels presented themselves. So I got into the University of Kansas, so I moved here from Stockton, California. And I started thinking about home a lot and the things that made me kind of miss home. So I was thinking about the objects that I made that I was currently making as cultural objects. And I was looking at cultural objects in Mexican-American contemporary life. And it kind of brought me to the lowrider, which is kind of this all-encompassing vehicle, or I call them vessels too, that represent regional identity, cultural histories, indigenous identities, as well as kind of just the personal artist's touch. So I started to really think about this vehicle as inspiration for my work moving forward. Right, I'm a ceramicist and I make vessels and sculptures, but I was thinking about this custom paint work as a glaze. And so custom paint refers to the practice of using urethane-based automotive paint, more specifically in the realm of candy paints that are transparent and glitter. So you can see them on lowriders, right, in LA and Austin, Texas, in Arizona and New Mexico. But you can also see them around here. If you go to your local lake, you'll see a bass boat kind of decorated and painted this way. So it's funny that when I moved to the Midwest, I stopped seeing cars and I started seeing boats painted this way. So custom paint work refers to that type of surface treatment. And so a lot of times you can see references of a cultural history of indigenous Mayan and Aztec histories on these pieces. And lowriders really started as a Mexican-American kind of tradition and culture, or subculture. So I had this idea of how to bring, my own identity into my work and create these unique pieces with custom paintwork. So I really thought about how I can use line and fading and shapes and volume to really accentuate the form of my pieces. So I started this body of work with these smaller vessels that were really just bottles, right? And tonight, for the art walk, I'm gonna have a few of these on display at my table so you can see them. But I also started thinking about my own identity as a Mexican American, right? I have a lot of European influence in me and in my life, but also this indigenous side of Aztec and Mayan mix, right? And so that makes me Mexican American, these two things that come together that are in conflict. So I started looking at these European ancient vessels. This is a Greek crater, and there are Italian craters as well. And I just try to put context of my own lowrider paintwork onto these pieces to talk about art history in a different way. And the first summer into my grad school experience, I visited my dad. He lives in Tijuana. And so I visited him, and we both went to the National Anthropology Museum in Mexico City, and I got to see these really enormous monumental sculptures that the Aztecs and Mayan made. And I wanted to learn more about the histories of those Mesoamerican pots and sculptures, and the histories and stories that they had to tell. So this is a really important piece that I saw there. It's the Aztec god of the underworld, Mictlantecuhtli. And this is a relief pattern depicting the underworld. There's some skull and crossbones if you look really closely. So this is my piece, Vessel of Mictlan. And so this won first place at the NCICA Student Juried Exhibition in Cincinnati. So here I'm using the kind of archetypal Greek crater pot. This has a lot of European influence, but I'm changing the contemporary surface to depict the Aztec god of the underworld. So this European side of me and this Aztec side are coming in conflict with each other on this piece. And then I'm taking what I kind of saw from the visit to the Anthropology Museum, and I'm painting it here. There's some skull and crossbones. And on the inside, right, vessels have an exterior, and oftentimes they have an interior. And whatever is happening, a lot of times I just kind of forgot about the inside, but I wanted to activate the inside of these vessels. So I upholstered with a crushed velvet interior to mimic the inside of the lowriders themselves. So you can see another relief kind of design of Mictlan's head. And so this is like the interior of the piece. So after that piece, I was thinking about religion a lot and Catholicism, and I was kind of really drawn to this image of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which is like a conversion tool for indigenous people. And these symbols all have very subversive meanings, and their main goal was to convert people into Catholicism. So I thought about this kind of icon and symbol being really prevalent in our culture and in lowrider culture as well. And I thought about, how it permeates our lives, whether we have control of it or not. And this is a really great Instagram page. It's called Where's Lupita? And it just depicts her image in Mexico City, just on random surfaces, on walls, on tapestries. And so I decided I wanted to make my own vessel of Guadalupe, right? So here I tagged this whiteboard in my studio, Guadalupe. This is kind of in a West Coast tag. And I'm transferring the letters over, or I'm kind of masking off these areas. And so this is the final piece here. And it's sitting on a upholstered pedestal, right? So I'm mimicking those interior spaces and exterior displays that lowriders often show. And then every kind of symbol is brought back from the original tilma of Our Lady of Guadalupe, and it's represented on the vessel itself. So you can see it in this image. I'm using the letters, pink like her dress, green with stars like her mantle, and then roses that are kind of in the background to represent her. And the interior space is also activated. You can see the sun rays. I'm going to go back to the image again. So the sun rays that are behind her are now kind of coming out. They're beaming out of this interior space. And then the rose upholstery that's on the inside. And then the rose that kind of surrounds the rim here. And so here's a photo of, this is at my thesis show. Some people looking inside so you can see the scale of this piece. So I was fortunate enough to have this included, I was included in this artist talk with community leader Eric Arasso. And he's from Lawrence, he lives in Lawrence, but he runs a lowrider car club in Kansas City. And he also is the leader of the Olathe Lowrider Bike Club. And so he's a really great role model for the community. And this is his vehicle here. And you can see my pot all the way in the back, right in front of the building. So we both gave a talk at the Spencer Art Museum about how lowrider culture has influenced our lives and our art, and then how the community has affected us in positive ways. So Eric actually convinced me to get out of the studio, right? As artists, we're always in the studio, we're never meeting anyone. We just want to make our art. But sometimes you have to get out, especially if you're making work that is very interdisciplinary and you're pulling from these different subcultures, and you're really branching out. You have to meet people who inhabit those spaces. So Eric convinced me to take this lowrider painting class with Rob Vanderslice. So Rob Vanderslice is a world-renowned lowrider painter, and he's from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he was in Kansas City for a 2-day painting workshop. So you can see we had this board, and it was just 2 days. We had to paint it as quick as we could. And so he's right there between those two cars, and all of us are in the background holding our boards up. And this kind of experience was really stressful because the last piece, the Our Lady of Guadalupe piece, took me forever to paint. It took me like more than a whole semester because I was really kind of new and learning techniques as I went. So at this workshop, I had to learn how to paint super fast, and I learned a lot of tips and tricks from him that kind of allowed me to have more creative freedom in the painting process. And then through that, it made me realize that I could build more sculpturally. So after the time spent thinking about these European vessels, I started looking into more Mesoamerican pots, specifically Mayan and Aztec. And this is a Mayan pot that's at the Anthropology Museum in Mexico City, and I really kind of fell in love with this piece. It's like unlike anything that you learn about, right, or that I learned about in undergrad. I mostly spent my undergrad learning about East Asian ceramics, Korean and Japanese ceramics, and then also Greek ceramics. So right here I was in California. I never learned about any Aztec or Mayan Mesoamerican pottery. So I wanted to take on that kind of curriculum for myself and learn more about these pieces. So I decided I'm going to recreate some of these kind of like iconic pieces on a larger scale, and I'm going to paint them in a contemporary Mexican-American way to kind of show how they're prevalent in this day and age. So here on this piece, you can kind of see the beginnings of the forms and volumes that I've kind of mapped out. So I fire these pieces all the way up to a really high temperature, and then I use the urethane paint to build up layers, and pinstriping tape, which is like a 1/4 inch really fine vinyl tape. And you can bend it because it's plastic, so it has really nice qualities. And so I'm using the line here to create symmetry and form and volume so that I can paint. And so you can see here, I've painted these pieces, or this piece, with these different colors. And so this is my kind of modern rendition of that ancient vessel. And so here it is displayed on this pedestal, and I'm using speaker box carpet. So I'm always thinking about the car, the vehicle, right, the culture. How can I display these in a unique way so that they're not sitting on a white rectangular box? How do I use my pedestal to activate the piece itself, and how do they, have a conversation with each other? So I'm using mirrors that are kind of in between those two pedestals, and then I have a bunch of black sequin and diamonds. And so this is in the gallery at the Charlotte Street Foundation, which I'm currently a resident at in Kansas City. And I thought this is a really great shot because of the image of Our Lady of Guadalupe in that photograph behind. So I'm also referencing that. This was called La Onda, and it showcased local Latino Mexican American artists. So here you can see the Guadalupe tilma or the stained glass, and it kind of mimics the colors, so it's really great composition. So moving on from that, I was thinking about this piece that's on the poster. But this is the original piece. This is a terracotta Aztec pot, and it represents Tlaloc, which is the god of rain, thunder, wind, and they're using materials that were readily available to them, right, that they are kind of refining. So a lot of these is like terracotta and then a blue pigment that's more of like a terra sigillata or like a wash. But if I want to retell this story and recreate it, I can have the freedom to change those materials, those that will affect the surface treatment. So I'm kind of recreating this on a larger scale and really thinking about, like, how do I place this in our time in history, like here and now? And I think that, like, with the use of the lowrider paint, I can really speak about, like, our contemporary life. And so you can see it's here for scale, and then so it's gone through the firing, it came out, and I'm starting to build up layers of line work and volume and color. And so this is at my thesis show at the Edgar Heap Birds Gallery at the University of Kansas, and it's sitting on the top of a pedestal. So on the left here is Eric Arasso and his lowrider team, the diverse ones from Kansas City. So I'm going to talk some more about them later on in the presentation. So after that piece, I started realizing, okay, I can paint quicker now. I can start to build more sculpturally. I'm going to really push this idea and recreate this large serpent head. So this is the largest piece I've ever made, and it was really complex. The last piece I had some problems with, like, I didn't really include it, but I had some problems with the firing and the volume being, like, really extreme and wide. So in order to, like, mitigate risks, I built this huge internal structure on the inside that it contributed to the piece weighing like 500 pounds or something. So it was kind of maybe I overdid it, but it survived the firing. So here you can see that internal structure and then the building of, like, the exterior space here. And then so this is the final piece. And at KU we have some big kilns, and this is a car kiln, so you pull it out and you can push it back in. So they're easier to load, and instead of, like, having to lift something, right? So this is the serpent head, and it's a representation of Quetzalcoatl, which is the serpent god, the Aztec serpent god, right? So this is my own rendition of it, and this is in a leather hard stage right now. So it's pretty dense, and I left it in that kiln to to dry out for, like, I think it was like a month and a half, and it still didn't dry out that much. So here's our kind of big spray booth at the ICRC. I don't know if some of you are familiar with that. It's the Interdisciplinary Ceramic Research Center that's attached to KU, and a lot of artists are residents there. But I was fortunate enough to have a working space there while I was a grad student, and this is our really large spray booth. So you can see the serpent back there with, it's primed, so it came out of the kiln. I put some primer on it, getting ready to paint. Putting the first layers of color, a base coat, glitter, lots of glitter in these pieces so they're really bright. I'm using the same kind of techniques that lowrider painters use to make these, but they're sculptures, right? So I have to think about certain things a little differently. So here you can see the vinyl tape. I'm working on I call this the roof, the very top of the head. And this vinyl tape, all of these kind of shapes are all made with vinyl tape, so it's just like that thin line, but you can create volume and shapes and patterns. So here I am painting some more, so you can see how big it is. And it's on the hydraulic cart, so I can bring it up and down and paint in that spray booth. Lots of masking, lots of tape work, lots of like protecting certain areas. But this went a lot smoother after I went to that workshop and met Rob than it would have, in the past. This would have taken me forever to paint, but I learned those skills with Rob. And so this is the final piece in the gallery, and it's sitting on this pedestal that is at a 10-degree angle, so it's down at one corner, lower than the rest of the angle, so it's kind of like diagonally, I guess you could say leaning, right? And so the reason why I decided to have this pedestal lean this way was to reference three-wheeling in lowriders. Three-wheeling is when you use the hydraulics to sit on three wheels and you drive down the road. So I wanted my piece to three-wheel, right? And this is the closest I can get to that. So I'm using the same kind of upholstery fabric, the crushed velvet, and then the speaker box fabric on top of that. So, and then you can see Tlaloc over there, he's the rain god, and it has the clouds, the like faux fake clouds, right? That's another element of like lowrider display, is every car kind of has a theme or a narrative surrounding it, and they're displayed with kind of like quirky and silly, like sometimes there'll be teddy bears next to the cars, or roses, or just kind of like some of the most random things. And that's part of that's kind of part of the whole art and display of them. So I'm trying to mimic those same like afterthoughts, I guess you should say. Some of them feel like afterthoughts because of like how silly the materials are, but they're all pretty deliberate, and they kind of follow the narrative along. So you can see here the back of the head, and then the top. So these were facing each other in the gallery space. And so my friend Chris Arasso, who's Eric Arasso's son, he hosts Brown Boy Media Instagram, and he is a local Casey photographer of lowriders. And so he goes around the country of photographing lowriders. So he took this photo, and you can see, so that's the very top of the roof of the piece here. So it's pretty hard to find symmetry in like a 3D object that you build with your hands, right? So if you look really closely, it looks symmetrical, but it isn't. Like every shape is kind of just off a little bit, but I feel like it adds to it just slightly, right? Because this is a handmade clay piece that's painted. So it won't be perfect, but there is kind of like fun and joy in trying to find symmetry on this. So after grad school, this is a really bad photo, but this piece made it into the Outstanding Student Achievement in Contemporary Sculpture show for the International Sculpture Center. And I kind of just de-installed this piece from that show, so I drove it to Pittsburgh to install it for that show. And so this is currently on the first page of the Sculpture magazine for this month's edition. So going back to the lowrider club, right? Making this work is, I'm an artist and I sit in my studio, I make by myself, right? But there's a whole kind of support system and community out there that I've tapped into. And it's kind of a give and take, right? Like, to be a part of this community, you kind of have to, I've found that to be accepted, I might have to like honor the paintwork or, you know, do my part and really stay true to the practice. But this lowrider group is really kind of amazing, and they're really leaders in the community. So they agreed to have a car hopping show at my thesis exhibition. So this was outside the gallery at KU, and they brought their lowriders and they hopped them and they displayed them for like the community. And they're super gracious, and they agreed to do this for me, and I fed them. So, but this is Eric with his Cadillac, right, painted in the lowrider style, and he has hydraulics, so he's hopping it for some of the KU professors and students. And so this is a few shots of my thesis work. So this was happening right outside during the thesis show. And this was the first time that lowriders were ever publicly displayed in a group show on KU's campus. So I just think that it fit perfect with, like, considering the circumstances of having the show and the lowrider show at the same time. So these are a few more images of the thesis show some of these pieces, or all of these pieces, were in this slideshow. And then, so after I graduated, I started at the Charlotte Street Foundation, being a resident there, and I've been making work, but also being in shows, and really moving this kind of like idea of community building and shows past KU. So this is at the Kansas City Community College Gallery. And so some of the bikes that were made by those kids in the Olathe Lowrider Bike Club are displayed alongside Brown Boy Media's photographs, and they're next to my sculptures. So we're all kind of like showing our work together in the same gallery. So here's Brown Boy Media on the left, me in the middle, and Eric on the right. So these are people in the community that I met during grad school that I've like become good friends with, and so hopefully we'll be showing together in the future. And yeah, here's another photo of the lowrider outside of my thesis show. So that's it. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, I guess I can take questions now.
I'm like, yeah, I have questions. Thanks for coming. It's really great work. I am curious if you could talk about like the time it takes to make the piece, to paint the piece, to make the pedestal, like the investment there.
Yeah, it's a lot of time. It's like, I mean, you should have seen my house. It was like a complete disaster. Or my apartment, I should say. You really have to sacrifice a lot of stuff in your personal life, sadly, to make work that, the way I see it is like I could have made 100 things instead of like 4 really large things and spent the same amount of time. Right, you still have time, but each piece takes more time. So it's really like a matter of practicing patience with yourself. And it's not an easy task, a lot of times we want to finish. And I had those moments working on these where I just like wanted to pull the tape off and be done with it, but I knew that I needed to like see the process out. But as far as like that snake took me a month and a half to build out of clay, like every single day, and then a month and a half to dry in the kiln, a week to fire, and then I needed to sand it another week. And then it took another month and a half to like be completely finished with the paint, right? So then that is like already so many months just making one piece. and then I had to consider the pedestal afterwards. So then I had to make the pedestal, and it's a long time, for sure. But I mean, the great thing about KU is it's like a fully funded program, and they don't want you to get a job, right? They give you enough money to be a student. Well, so much. They give you so much money, but there's a lot of time on your hands, right, to balance everything else. So yeah, it's definitely a difficult thing, I think. Yes.
What kind of clay do you use, and how many pounds of clay went into like the snake or one of those pieces?
Yeah, I think I go back to. I just use like a regular stoneware clay, and so you can see the bags underneath. So I don't know. That was like 3 or 4. I think it was 4 Soldner mixers worth, which is like 250 pounds at a time. But like this piece, I think is maybe 150 pounds, and then the snake, I think it has to be like around 500. But I'm just using regular stoneware with lots of grog, like a lot of additives, so that it has less shrinking stress. But then that actually presents more problems down the road, because then I have all these little tiny pit marks in my piece that I have to like fill in with like a Bondo or something, right? If I want a smooth painted surface. So yeah, it's a lot of clay, but it's a really like simple recipe. I think I just use fire clay and ball clay and custard or mahavir and silica. But it's really the and I fire it. It's like a cone 10 stoneware, but I fire it up to like a cone, like a mid range, like a cone 3 or 5. So I don't fire it up all the way. So yeah.
How did you throw these on a wheel, or did you build it by slab?
They're all coil and slab built. Yeah. I build them on a Shimpo banding wheel, like one of the bigger Shimpo banding wheels. I think they're like $120, but they have like a huge weight capacity. I think like 300 pounds. So I built this on a banding wheel. So I coil built it, and the banding wheel was spinning. Not like, I was just kind of spinning it slowly. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, this is similar to what she asked, but how many pounds is the finished piece?
That's a good question. 2 people can lift this piece relatively easily, but not. It's kind of hard to walk with these pieces, but the other pieces are too heavy for 2 people to lift. But they lose, I think, clay loses like 30%. It loses all of its water, so that's like 30% of the amount of weight. So, yeah.
Have you had your big pieces crack on you, and if so, how do you fix them?
Yeah, so I left that out of the presentation. But so this piece here cracked pretty bad. And the reason for that is because the base, or where the head is, was so wide that there was no internal structure to keep it from collapsing. So it like shrunk, like it was like this, and then it shrunk like this. So then there was a big crack that opened in the back, and it was like this wide, right? So that was a problem, because this was like going to be in my thesis show. I only had so much time. So what I did is, the great thing about working with a cold finish, which these are like applied a cold finish, you don't have to put them in the kiln again, right? So you can glue them back together. Or like if your bisque ware breaks and you're going to put it in the cone 10 reduction firing, you have to put bisque fix on it and hope that it stays together. So these, you don't have to do that to this. So what I ended up doing, I don't have a photo of it, or in the presentation, but I ended up getting inside of the piece and fiberglass resining that crack closed, and then on the outside, and then I bondoed it, and then I primed it. But I had to glue it together pretty much. And it is kind of heartbreaking when that happens. My snake piece cracked. It wasn't like a dramatic crack, but it had a few stress cracks just from the firing. It's so big and heavy. So then I ended up filling those in.
It's amazing what you can hide.
Yeah, you can. You can hide a lot. But that adds on like you know, it's just, you want it to come out of the kiln perfect, and it never does. So then that just adds more time like working on it and fixing it, which art takes a lot of time. So yeah.
So do you have a lowrider or a boat?
I have I wish I had a lowrider. I have a really old aluminum boat.
Okay.
I want to paint it, but maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'll paint a car instead. But yeah. Yes.
So what are your next plans?
Oh, sorry. Well, as far as work goes, I have a few ideas of sculptures that I want to make. That I'm currently starting a few. But right now, I'm applying to different residencies and just trying to figure out like the next steps. I do have a podcast at NCICA, which is going to be in March. I'm hosting this podcast with a student from Iowa, Javier. He's from Mexico, and we're going to talk about Mexican ceramics in the Midwest. And I'm going to be in a show at NCICA too, a few small pieces.
What's the podcast's name? Plug it.
I think it's you know what, I haven't looked at it. We keep talking about what we're going to talk about, but then I don't know it. I think it is Mexican American ceramics, honestly. I should have plugged it.
If you send it to me, I can post it.
Okay, cool.
to this.
Yeah, that'd be sweet. Yeah. Yeah, you had a question.
With the construction of the pedestals and how heavy the finished sculptures end up being, how do you transfer them to new spaces? Like, do you have to plan out, like, if you were to send these to another museum that you weren't yourself installing the piece, like, are there any concerns about, like, are they modular? Do the pedestals come apart? Or?
Yeah, that's a very important thing to consider. The cost to ship like these things would be enormous, right? So I've had to personally drive them out to the places to install them, which is something that I think if you make big work, it comes with like a whole new challenge, like so many new challenges. The smaller pieces I've shipped in boxes, but when they start to get like medium size, you're gonna have to build crates for them and then find a way to ship them for sure. But I've tried to like drive almost all of them, all of the big pieces myself, and install them myself. So it's just one of those things. Like I don't really have the best answer or like plan, so I just have to kind of figure it out as I go. And really, that's a lot of like making art and showing it. There's a lot of that. Like nothing is going to be set up perfectly. You just kind of have to figure it out, which is stressful for sure. But
Are you gonna stay with the big pieces, or are you gonna start going smaller, or do you know yet?
a little bit smaller, yeah.
A little easier to handle?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
So as somebody who's not really in the ceramic world, I was going through your presentation, I was assuming that most of the color I was seeing was glaze. Could
Yeah.
you talk a little bit more about your decision to use paint instead of glaze?
Yeah. Well, for these, they're really like to use paint on this. It becomes a whole different kind of sculptural object. I think I've always been really fascinated by ceramics, contemporary ceramics where artists use like an ancient or historical model or pot or vessel, and then they change the meaning of the surface, so they use a contemporary surface. So there's a bunch of ceramic artists out there. I mean, I'm thinking like Roberto Lugo, Stephen Lee, Rose B. Simpson, who use a contemporary surface to change the meaning of a historical vessel. And so I think that's what I'm interested in using this paint to represent not only contemporary life, but my own cultural identity. And also glaze is I've glazed, lots of things, but the decision to use paint gives you more freedom with color, more vibrant color, but also it adds to that story of like cultural identity. So.
I was going to ask, what is your artistic process
making such large work, it kind of like scares me. How do you decide on like, I'm gonna do this?
Yeah.
So,
Drawing a lot, drawing in your sketchbook. But there's only so many times you can draw before you have to like commit to it, right? Making a lot of clay beforehand, before you start, and just kind of pressuring yourself into starting is like the hardest part. But you know, all of them kind of got gradually bigger, right? So it's always like good to start that way, right? Like gradually work up the confidence to build bigger and larger, and learn from those mistakes that happen along the way. The reason why this snake had so much internal structure was because the blue piece ended up collapsing a little bit, right? I almost ended up losing it all. So I had to mitigate those risks moving forward. And but yeah, and then I had another piece that completely collapsed, and so I didn't show that. But you know, you lose pieces in the process, and it's just a learning experience.
On a similar note, how many, like, have you ever had like a piece explode in the kiln, like with air bubbles? I know those can be a problem.
Yeah, I have, none of these did, but I have had smaller pieces do that for sure. Fast firings will cause something to explode. So I try to use all the gas from the kiln. I'm paying tuition, you know, so like if I can use as much gas as I can, slow down the process, I do. Any other questions?
Do you use the same paint that you would use on a car?
Yeah.
It's the exact same.
Yeah, it's the exact same, yeah.
That's really nice.
Yeah, I had this moment where I was thinking, you know, maybe I could use glaze that looks like this paint, but I think I would have to I'd spend like a lifetime developing like a glaze chemistry that, like, it was just maybe too much work. And then I lose that community, right, of painters in the lowrider community, because we're using different materials, right? And so using the same material that a different group of people use connects you in this way.
About the paint process, is there something that you have to coat the finished clay body in before you can paint it? Are you worried about things like dissolving over time, or?
Yeah. So these are all painted with what's called a 2K, either a 2K primer or 2K clear, which is, you have two chemicals, or two paints, right? And then one of them, they cause a chemical reaction, so they harden. So it's kind of like, I don't know if anyone's worked with like Bondo or certain epoxies, they'll harden, right? And then they'll be more durable. So these paints are the same paints that are on cars. So cars, you can leave them outside or drive them around and they last for a pretty long time. But eventually they'll disintegrate. I was making porcelain functional ware before this, and you know, if you think about, those pieces can last like 10,000 years, right? A porcelain functional bowl. So these, maybe I'm getting rid of like a few thousand years for sure with these, and that's fine. Like if these last 200 years from now, that's okay. And that's one thing that like ceramicists really consider a lot, is like the longevity and durability of the piece. But I think I don't worry about it as much anymore, now that I'm using a different material. But yeah, fit and finish is really important. These clear coats, you know, are durable in the sun and in the elements. So we'll see. That is. Yes.
I'm gonna switch gears a little to a process like philosophy.
Yeah.
So, do you think that oppression or censorship of certain identities is going to become a larger issue in the near future? And if you do think that, what can artists be doing to combat that?
I think, yeah, that's a good question. Censorship's always kind of happening around us, whether we see it or not. Pressures from like different organizations are always trying to censor, and I think the best way to kind of like work around that is just make more work, right? The more work you make, the more work you make and that you show, that represents your identity is a way to fight back, I would say. Right, if I never showed this or if I never showed this work, never put it out in the world, never had artist talks, this would be gone, this whole theme. And it's a way to really connect people to my identity and like a people that I identify with. So I would say to like just make more artwork, honestly, and artwork is, especially artwork that is really important to your identity, is a way of, I don't know, it's a way of fighting back, I would say. So, any other questions? Show your artwork, make it and show it. Showing it is important. Yeah.
To support the ESU Art Forum program, please visit emporia.edu/art. Click on the Events tab, scroll down to the Art Forum link and click. Then scroll down to the Support Art Forum button and click. Finally, choose your donation level and click on the Continue button to complete the process. We appreciate your support.